back to the podcast of Basketball Love. It is October 24th, 2022. I am your host, Josh Verlin. As always, joined by Owen, McCue, Daubert, COBL. Joined today by a very special guest, the founder and scouting director of Elite High School Scouting, Ari Rosenfeld. Ari, thank you so much for coming and joining the podcast of Basketball Love.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to it.
Obviously, lots of hoops to talk tonight, but we can't start off tonight's podcast with anything other than the Philadelphia Phillies. I mean, if you're a sports fan in Philadelphia, huge story. And I know it's not the sport we typically cover, but Daubert, one of our writers, also a fantastic Phillies writer for Phillies Nation. I know you were literally right there in Philly in the middle of the action last night. Wrote a fantastic piece for Phillies Nation. I would just love your thoughts on what it was like being out in Philly through all that celebration.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. I think the way this has come together in a span of literally like 3 weeks. It was just 3 weeks ago they clinched the postseason. It was pretty ugly at the end of the regular season. And the way they've kind of changed like every perspective on them from the people in Philadelphia, around Philadelphia, who care about Philadelphia pro sports. They were kind of seen as like these guys who all they do is disappoint and collapse. And that's what it was for a bunch of years in a row. And they've caught lightning in a bottle and they've turned it around. And now they're going to be playing in the World Series next weekend, which is incredible and almost weird to think. And I think the scene in Center City where I was on Broad Street, I was by City Hall last night. I think it was just representative of that. People can't really believe it, but in this moment, like they're going to enjoy it, because as the last 11 years or however much it was for the Phillies, like moments like this don't come around too often. So people were ready to enjoy this, however improbable it was. And I know Owen's been keeping up, been excited about the team too. So it's just cool. It's cool to be around. It's cool to be a part of.
I know none of us here obviously are baseball or football experts. Well, Ty, maybe you're a little bit more of a baseball expert than the rest of us, but
I played.
Okay, fair, but like not MLB.
Watching you say Owen's not an expert in. Come on.
More likely, do you think that we will be celebrating an Eagles Super Bowl victory or a Phillies World Series championship? Owen, I'll throw to you first.
What, the Phils are 50-50 right now? Probably not exactly, but I mean,
maybe that wasn't the best question.
I give him a coin toss. Yeah, I go.
Yeah,
Phillies. Anything can happen with the NFL season, so I'll take the Phils. And they're the team that's up next. So, as classic Philadelphia sports fan tradition, you always live in the present.
Can we get both in 1 year? And if so, how cursed are we for the next 5 decades?
Yeah,
Ty.
Well, it has to be the Phillies. 4 wins away. I don't know if I'd pick them to beat Houston. I think Houston's a better team, but I didn't think they would get past Atlanta. They've beaten a lot of expectations. So who really knows? It would be, how do I want to say this? It would be shocking, but at the same time, like I almost kind of expect it. That's just kind of like the way they've done things over the last couple of weeks in the playoffs.
Ari, what are your thoughts?
I guess, I mean, knowing next to nothing about baseball, Ty just kind of hit it on the head with what with what he just said at the end of like he'd be surprised, but he'd almost expect it. That just sort of are the vibes that I've gotten from the 3 weeks that I've really been following this team. So I mean, and like Owen said, they're there already. So I've got to go with the Phillies. Long way away for the Eagles. Hopefully, obviously, knock on wood, they keep this going. But I'll go with the Phillies, and yeah, it should be a fun week, 10 days or so for the series.
All right, yeah, not my best question ever, but I was struggling on the fly to think of some way to connect the two. All right, let's talk hoops. Ari, as I mentioned in our opener, you're the founder, scouting director of Elite High School Scouting. We're going to be talking to you a lot tonight about your thoughts on various players, prospects throughout the region. Before we get into that, I really want to get into who you are for the people who are going to be watching and listening that don't necessarily know this. First of all, I should obviously mention you're a former COBL writer. Got your start with the site. I first met you as a high schooler back at Penn Charter. Obviously, you've come a long way since then. So why don't you just tell people about what Elite High School Scouting is, how big your subscriber base has grown and what you really specialize in.
Yeah, so I mean, very, very bare bones that Elite High School Scouting is a scouting service for men's college basketball programs at all levels, and has really grown from initially being pretty Philadelphia centric to now really being something that coaches look to really all over the country. Still primarily specializing in the Northeast and Mid Atlantic. Me and my vice president Tom Keller, who's based out in Allentown, I'd say have really become one of, if not the foremost authorities on grassroots basketball in that region, sort of New England down through the DMV. And then I'm sort of kind of continuing to grow and expand things nationally. Mostly just really evaluating players and trying to find best fits for our college clients.
How did you start doing that, Ari? How young were you kind of when that became something you were interested in? It's kind of a field that I didn't really know a lot about until I probably started working with Josh a couple years ago.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, so I sort of started seeing myself doing something like this from really before I can remember. Always saw myself working in basketball, and if anybody saw me in person, they would know that wasn't going to be playing. So there was always kind of that search of what really my niche could be, which ultimately led me, as Josh mentioned, to starting to write for COBL back while I was still in high school. I guess right junior year and going into my senior year of high school, started with Josh. And really, Owen, like you said, I didn't know that much about certainly like the grassroots basketball business. I knew who like the top players in Philly and in South Jersey were just from kind of combing the Inquirer. Thought that kind of journalism and sports writing would be my entree into a career in basketball. And that's sort of when I learned more about what the role of scouts are, and that, a scouting service is something that exists. First off, which is obviously why I wanted to start by explaining that, because a lot of people don't necessarily know that. And that sort of led me to COBL, sort of started building a network in the grassroots space through there, started college and sort of came back to Josh, I guess, a little almost midway through my sophomore year, and was like, you know what, let's start up a scouting service. I knew I kind of had the idea and thought I had some of the expertise and the ability to start being able to do it. And at that point, Josh really had the network of coaches and a client base from just his years of doing COBL. And I built up some of that myself for my couple years working with him. And, we're kind of able to hit the ground running from there. And at that point, when Josh sort of decided he wanted to get out of it, was around when I was finishing college. So that kind of worked out great for me timing wise, to be able to sort of spin it off into something that was going to be my primary thing. We were the Delaware Valley Hoops Report at that time, I should mention, when we first started. A couple years out of college, kind of outgrew that name just because I was doing work in so many other areas, and sort of spun that off into Elite High School Scouting. That's kind of how we've gotten here over the last couple of years, officially under that moniker, and about a year and a half since we brought Tom Keller on, who's been absolutely huge towards everything we've done since then, and our growth in that time. So yeah, that's kind of where it started. Was right here with COBL, I must say, and it's been a really fun almost 8 or 9 years since, which is hard to believe. Next year will be my 10th summer.
Wow.
With the grassroots space,
Wow.
the summers are where a lot of things happen. So yeah, and that's, and I started in June, so I was marketed, to be my 10th summer.
You mentioned kind of like the grassroots start of all of it, and kind of building your network along with Josh. And I was just wondering, like, when you first got into scouting and kind of doing all this, how you went about like building trust with coaches and like establishing yourself as someone, like when coaches are looking for players, like your expertise and your insight is something they can trust, and how do you kind of set yourself apart from any voice they're hearing, I guess?
Yeah, I guess when it started, and I always say, our advantage was sort of that myself, and then especially Josh for even longer, like we'd kind of been doing the work for a while, and not charging anybody for it, and not just not in an official way. But certainly people at that point already knew that Josh and COBL were in gyms. And like I said, I'd had a few years to kind of build my own network personally. And people knew that I was somebody that was out there and was working hard and was at least, like I said, the first and foremost is they knew we were at least in the gym. We weren't, making stuff up about kids or stealing, just following the crowd's opinions or anything like that. Like they knew we were there and we were working hard. And I think over that time got to know that we were, honest, upfront, people. And having that sort of runway on the front end before ever really spinning it into a scouting service was huge. And then like anything else, kind of word travels, especially in the basketball community. It's a big, small community where there's a lot of people and a lot of different spaces in it, but they all kind of are connected to each other and know each other a little bit. And even coaches are, they compete with each other, but they're friends and they share a lot of stuff. So it's, oh, hey, we're using this great service in Philly. This may be something you should look at. And once you sort of establish that expertise, it's become easier to kind of just grow it regionally, as I've kind of continued to just, like I said, it started with doing the work, as I've kind of just continued to do the work each step of the way. And it's sort of right now is that step of doing a lot of the work nationally while still primarily being a regional service. And that's sort of like the next step in our growth is doing that work on the front end and building the trust and building the knowledge base as well, to be honest, to get to the point where you can really, make it something that's monetizable and that's legitimate and seen as credible.
Ari, that's a perfect segue into what I was going to ask you next. And as a segue, or as a side note, I should say, I can vouch for the quality of Ari's product. I mean, I've seen his reports. They're incredibly thorough, detailed. I mean, I don't know half the technical knowledge of basketball that Ari even begins to possess, but you can just see, I mean, it's much more than just like, oh, is good with the ball. I mean, it's incredibly detailed notes on all the players you cover. And so I think that can really speak to the success of why it grew so quickly, is because you could tell how much work was going into it. And I'm going to merge that with my last point about your growth is, what is your balance between how much time you can spend in the Philadelphia area versus how you try to get around and cover a regional schedule and see those teams in New England? I mean, how do you balance that back and forth of where to be on any given weekend or month or,
Yeah, I mean, so I'll be totally honest. It's not something I have figured out down to any science or down to a T yet. Really, the time when I had gotten out of college in 2019 was obviously like, and really was able to hit the ground running all year round doing this. And that's especially when I first really started to expand out of the Philly area, because I wasn't spending 8 months of my year in Syracuse. Then obviously COVID came in March 2020 and threw a big wrench into everybody's plans, and basically shut down the grassroots basketball world here for probably the better part of 4 to 6 months, and threw it off kilter for about a year and a half at least. Still kind of has it off kilter depending on who you might ask. So yeah, I mean, it's not something that I have down to a science yet in the time that, since then that things have really been up and running. The benefit for me is I always want to be in the gym. If you know, like people who know me, I think would vouch for that. And I live in the Philly area still, and don't see that changing anytime soon. So it's been easier to branch out. And if it's all right, like this big weekend event in Philly that I normally am at, I can't make, but like I know I'm going to be at 4 or 5 open gyms over the course of the week, just because that's what I want to be spending my time doing while I'm here. So there's not really science. I mean, our base is still greater Philadelphia area, and I want to make sure that we have everything kind of down pat here before we're spending too much time branching off. And that's again where Tom Keller's been gigantic, and has really allowed me to branch out and grow the business, spread our visibility and not lose that credibility locally.
Speaking of local events, and I definitely we'll definitely get your thoughts on a lot of the top local prospects in just a couple minutes here, but I did want to first go to the most recent local event, high-level event, the Pangos All-American East freshman and sophomore camp that was at St. Joe's Prep this past weekend. I wasn't able to get out there, but Owen was there. Ari, I know you were there as well. So, Ari, first, if you could just give a brief, to our listeners, viewers not familiar with the event, overview of what the event is, and then kind of going into it, like what you like to get out of camps like that.
Yeah, so Pangos All East, Frosh Soph, shout out to Dinos Dragonis, who's built a pretty massive nationwide brand with his Pangos camps and AAU tournaments and high school events, sort of growing every year the amount of things under that banner. But still the bread and butter of Pangos is the Pangos All-American Camp, which is once a year. Used to be in LA, now it's in Vegas. Over the summer, it's usually in June. And so leading up to the Pangos All-American Camp throughout the year, Dinos has 4 regional freshman and sophomore camps throughout the country. I think it's Dallas, LA, Chicago, and then the used to be South Jersey. Now this year just moved over the bridge into Philly is Pangos All East. So basically just brings together a good amount of the top freshmen and incoming freshmen and sophomores, and really the whole area that I cover, the Northeast, New England, really down to the DMV, and a little bit beyond. But that's really the crux of it, and it's probably 240 kids. I'll get like 3 or 4 games, and then some all-star games at the end, and it ultimately is trying to identify some of the top guys and let them earn invites to the Pangos All-American Camp in June.
Oh, and I believe this was your first experience with, sort of that type of high level underclassmen camp. What were your, impressions, and any kids, especially some local prospects, that stood out to you?
Yeah, there were certainly quite a few wow moments when I looked at the sheet and saw 2026 next to the 6'7" kid putting 10 dunks in a game.
Story of my life.
Yeah. Malik Thomas, he's a sophomore from Pittsburgh that's kind of been blowing up, was like 6'4", can really shoot it, handle the ball. Who's that? AJ DiBentaza?
DeBonza. AJ
DeBonza was the 6'7", 6'8" freshman that did the whoa moment to me. Then I go over to Ari. He goes, yeah, he's got a 6'11" wingspan.
Where's he from?
Boston.
Yeah, so those were a couple of the wow guys for me. A lot of the local guys made some of the cream of the crop games they had there. Jake West, I hadn't really seen a lot of Carroll this year, but he was like really, really good in the early games I saw him, and still kind of even in the upper echelon top 30 game, like still left an imprint, making some assists.
Should mention too, I mean, Owen and I were only there on Sunday.
Yeah.
And as it sort of happened and could be the case with some of these camps, a lot of the local guys, it seemed, had been there on Saturday and weren't back on Sunday, or like, I know a couple got hurt or banged up on Saturday and weren't able to play on Sunday. Just talking specifically about local guys, that kind of threw things off a little bit, obviously.
Jacob Wen from Springford, I got to see him a lot last year, covering that area. And he was primarily just a spot-up shooter when I saw him, and kind of seeing some of the things. I obviously saw him a couple times for Springford in the offseason, but some of the things he's been doing with the ball in his hands have been really cool to see, especially as me kind of seeing him. I haven't got to see that development from a lot of the kids, which I'm sure is an exciting part of what you do, Ari, seeing these kids. Yeah. So that was kind of cool for me to see.
And he was one. He's been hurt for a little bit.
Yeah.
So I tried to see him this fall and hadn't been able to. Wanted to see him yesterday, and again with these camps and only being there one day, there's 240 kids and 90 of them playing at once, or so 80, 90 of them playing at once. So I didn't get to see Jacob. I'm glad to hear that he played well.
I just got a quick question here for either of you guys who were there. When it's an event like this where it's like younger guys, freshman, sophomore, and you're trying to evaluate and do scouting, how much do you weigh? Like, sometimes are you able to just like see something in a player? I guess like projecting a little bit with like these younger players where like they may not have it fully put together right now, but you can just like see certain traits. Like how much are you taking stock in that when you're, watching an event like that?
For me, that's really, I mean, that right there is kind of the crux of my job. So, and it's, a camp like this, the reality is that, a 5'8" kid who might be the most skilled in the world, and really hardworking and tough, is less appealing to me, especially at the young age when you're looking at projection, than the 6'11" kid who just turned 14 and might not really be able to catch and finish that consistently yet, but he runs like a deer and has a nice shooting touch and is really receptive to learning and wanting to be good like that. And for me, with a camp like this, especially, camp basketball on its best day can be pretty raggedy. Camp basketball with just freshmen and sophomores can be a roller coaster ride. So I try to go into these events really just trying to identify guys, and identify especially new guys who I maybe haven't heard about, and then be able to track them in their high school seasons or into their AAU seasons, rather than really watch them play and break down their games in this type of setting. And then there's kind of like the guys that oh, I've heard this name and have never seen him play at all. Let me at least make sure that I watch him for a few minutes to just sort of get a mental picture of him. But really, it's all just kind of looking at tools and looking at sort of flashes of what you can do in these type of settings, and then let me see in a real game setting what's real, what you're bringing to the table, and then obviously still with these kids, a huge part of it is still a projection of not what are you bringing to the table right now, but in 2-3 years, what do I think that you're going to be able to bring to the table?
And how have you found, Ari, like that you're, as you've been now doing this full-time scouting thing for several years now, how have you found that you're changing the way that you look at freshmen and sophomores? Are there traits that you're picking up on now that you necessarily wouldn't have noticed or seen, 5 or 6 years ago?
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing is just the process I kind of just laid out. I've been able to stick to much more fully, just with the benefit of being out of school and being able to do this full time. Is that, rather than having to lean on these camps where you can get a bunch of kids in one setting as a real evaluation point, it's really just more get everybody under one roof, see how everybody kind of lines up, and see if anybody pops out who I didn't know about before. That's been a key part of it, rather than leaning on a camp or leaning on one thing and not being able to track and follow it through, and see how real it is. I'd say one that I've kind of always been on, but it's still continuously more important, is just age. And to somebody who doesn't follow this thing that closely, that might seem weird that every freshman these days isn't necessarily equal. Whether some of these kids are in the same class, and one might have just turned 14 and one might have just turned 16. Especially at those ages, from a development standpoint and a projection standpoint, that's a huge thing to know. And for me, it factors into certainly my projections, especially when kids are that young. And then really my biggest thing that just overall, whether it's for any age, that I've changed as I started doing this, is just really identifying the kids who I know just absolutely love basketball, which again might seem crazy to people who are just fans of the game, that a lot of these players more and more year to year aren't necessarily huge fans of the game, aren't necessarily, it's just kind of something that they do. And that's okay. And you can be pretty successful with that. But the ones that I see, if you have a certain talent level, but the ones that I see who consistently exceed what you think their talent level might be are the ones who just really, really eat, sleep, and breathe it. And you can usually start to identify that at a pretty early age. And those are the kids I always love to identify early and just know, all right, whatever I think of them when things are said and done as a junior or senior, give them a little half bump up, because I know that they're going to kind of maximize their talent. And I know that there's other kids out there that probably aren't.
You mentioned that kind of an intangible thing is, like, I guess you can see a lot. Can you see a lot of the other stuff on like video? Is that kind of one of the big parts of like being in the gym and maybe getting to know some of the guys? Obviously, I'm sure you have a good relationship with some of the prospects.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's been one thing that's changed in the industry really in the time I've been in it, has been like, the continued advent of more and more video. And especially in the pandemic, that was huge. And it's frankly, it's nice that it's continued to stick around. But certainly, like, there's no replacement for being in the gym for exactly what you just said. Is like, you can't look on film and see if a kid loves the game. You can see it maybe a possession where he gave up and didn't play hard, et cetera, but if you're not in the gym, if you don't know that kid, you don't know that maybe that's because he just came up lame the play before that was off camera, or maybe it's because no, he really doesn't care and he's he's lazy. If you know his coach, if you know his teammates, if you know him, it's a lot easier to make those assertions. And especially if you have real relationships with kind of all those parties where they trust you enough to be honest of, no, this isn't this kid's entire life. Or sometimes no, they're like, no, this kid's here 6 days a week and we have to lock him out of the gym. When you know that and have the relationships and those are honest, you only get that from being in the gym. There's no replacement for that on film.
Yeah, all right, I was gonna say, because like some of these things that you're talking about, you can't know without actually knowing the player, right? Like,
Yep.
You can watch them and see how hard they work, but talk to the coaches a little bit. Like, how much time do you devote to actually getting some one-on-one time with these kids? Is that something that's important to you? And are there any questions? Because obviously you can't spend hours getting to know every prospect. Like, any questions that you try to ask in a short period of time that can give you an indication of where the intangibles lie?
Yeah, no, so that's been a big change as we sort of kind of continued to grow things and branch out regionally, is just that knowledge of, all right, I'm not going to be able to know every single player that goes in our report as in depth as I did when it was just the Delaware Valley Hoops report. And it was just the 150 to 200 kids that at a given time that we really were responsible for knowing. But no, I mean, even with that said, I still think it's really important to try to at least have interacted with the kid, if possible. And obviously the kids locally see me a lot, and I'm in gyms with enough that you develop more, and deeper relationships. Obviously not to the point of bias, but just knowing what the kids are about, and even just separate from knowing them, being able to observe them a lot, and you can learn a lot about kids from sitting in the gym and seeing what they do with their free time and how they interact with their friends and their teammates and all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, I try to have a baseline interaction with every kid. That's still part of why, even when we have packets with, certain, contact information and all that, our policy sort of as a company is still to go walk up and ask the kid, what's your height and weight? What's your phone number? What's your birthday? Because again, that's, that's big for us. And then the couple of things I always just try to ask, just to kind of pick guys' brains and see where their basketball head is at, is, just sort of how do you see yourself as a player? When you're playing your best, how are you impacting the game? I love asking who guys like to watch. You can learn a lot of how a player views himself based on who like the NBA or college guys are that they like to kind of watch and maybe model themselves after. And that's just sort of helpful to get a window into the kid, and just sort of what his basketball brain might be like. And also just, hey, is a kid comfortable? There's still some older scouts that'll be like, hey, if he gives you a firm handshake and looks you in the eye, like that's a big thing. And it's not necessarily as much for me, but you just sort of knowing what the kid's about and knowing, hey, he might not be a fit for this coach, not even based on level, just based on personality. But he might be better off with this one who maybe is even at a higher level and is a better personality fit. And you don't get that if you haven't, if you've just watched a kid on film, or if you just, even just observed him live in a gym. I do think it's really important to have at least that interaction and knowledge of what a kid is, what a kid's about somewhat.
You mentioned, being able to, like, being in this area, you're still able to see a lot of the local prospects. And like Josh mentioned before, we're kind of going to go over some of the prospects in the Philly area with you. Josh tweeted the other day about Justin Edwards. Was wondering, starting with him, and then we can get into some of the other guys, like your thoughts on him, his development, and just where he's at right now. And we can, I guess, lead that into our discussion of all these local guys.
Yeah, no, so absolutely. I guess, and Justin's a really good one for all of those traits that I just spent time talking about, that like I try to look for, the kind of separated kid and that are sort of intrinsic, and you mix that with obviously a lot of physical talent. That's where you get a kid like Justin Edwards, who, coming into high school, there were a couple people in Philly. I got to shout out Wayne, formerly of Team Final, now with Clutch Sports, who told me at the Junior All City Classic when they were in 8th grade that Justin Edwards was the best, best city product in that class. So there were people that knew him, but he wasn't somebody who, nationally or even regionally was like heralded as this huge, big time top dog type guy. And he's just sort of each step of the way continued to add layers and layers to his game, really starting from just being a catch and shoot guy as a freshman and sophomore who had good size. So you knew he was a prospect of some kind, but has just kind of sort of layer by layer, brick by brick, built his game. And is still in the process of building his game, I think. But it's one where you talk to anybody around the kid and it's like he doesn't want to be doing anything else other than continuing to work and getting better and then competing with his teammates. And that's just when you have that with the 6'6", 6'7" lefty who's gotten as athletic as he is and as smooth as he is and all that, and you mix in that kind of special ingredient, that's when you get a really, really, that's when you get a top 5, top 3 player in the country, a Kentucky commit, and probably McDonald's All-American in a few months.
Ari, if because obviously, so we're talking about Justin Edwards at Imhotep, the other. Well, there's 2 at Camden that are also in that discussion, but DJ Wagner certainly is the name that gets a lot of other discussion for could he be the number 1 player in the class. Can't go wrong, right? Either way, they're both great players. If you had to take one of Wagner or Edwards to say, let's say you're going to look, 5-6 years down the road, and you're building, let's say, an NBA franchise, right? Because we're assuming both those guys will be playing at the next level. Which one would you rather have?
That's you're putting me on the spot here. I'm gonna make some.
I am putting you on the spot.
Some people are gonna be really mad no matter how I answer. So I'll put this caveat on, and again, this is gonna make some people really mad. Is the 2023 high school class is not the strongest. And you can point to a number for some of that's random. You can say they've been jilted by the pandemic, certainly, and we don't know all the effects of that yet. But for whatever reason, it's not the strongest class. So these two are definitely both near the top of it and might be at the top of it. But I'm not sure either necessarily project as guys that you're building an NBA franchise around.
Fair. In the context of this question.
No, of course. But they're top 2 players in the country or 3 players in the country. So in certain years, that's a reasonable thing. I'm going to say right now, I don't think either of them are guys who you're building around. And with that said, with the way the NBA is these days and the value, positional value, etc., I would probably lean towards taking Justin because he's a 6'6", 6'7" wing who can contribute at a lot of different positions. And when I'm not looking at these guys necessarily as star players at that level, he can just do all the little things and has so much experience and displayed willingness to do all those little things that just kind of contribute to winning without being the guy that the team is built around. And DJ, just by virtue of being a 6'2", 6'3" scoring guard, relies on that ability to really score and have things flow through him. And there's just the reality is there's just fewer and fewer guys who get to do that each level that you go up. And DJ definitely has a chance to be one of those special guys, but if I'm playing the odds, I'll probably take Justin. And I do want to say that Aaron Bradshaw is definitely in that conversation. That if you open it up to 3, there is a chance certainly a reasonable argument to be made that Aaron Bradshaw is the one that you would want out of the 3. Who's the other McDonald's All-American likely at Camden, who's going to be playing with Justin at Kentucky, which is pretty scary to think about, and probably with DJ at Kentucky.
Is there an NBA comparison for Justin Edwards?
It's a hard. It's one that seeing at some of these national events, with some of these NBA scouts, honestly, that they've been able to be at has come up. Almost like there's like some Chris Middleton, and sort of just like the smoothness that he gets to his spots with, and elevates over guys, and especially likes to work the mid range. That's probably the best one I can throw out now. And I'm not like a great comparison person, especially off the top of my head, to be honest. But the beauty of Justin is you can kind of compare him to a lot of different players because of his ability to sort of shapeshift and play different spots and impact the game in different ways based on, who he's around and who he's playing against.
Yeah, I guess anybody else in either the 2023 or 2024 classes that what would be the next level of prospects, I guess, in the area that could be kind of maybe comparable?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately not in the area, unfortunately for people locally, not in the area anymore is Marco Jackson, who's a Marlton kid who's started at St. Augustine, been at Academy of the New Church in the Friends League, spent his last year in the NEPSAC, which is, the premier prep school conference in the country in New England, at South Kent. He's going to Kansas. So another kind of blue blood type kid, and had a huge spring and summer. Is at this point top 20, top 30 in most of these national rankings. If you look at Kachi Enzi at the George School, who's committed to the Big East at Xavier, is probably that next tier. And I mean, really, other than DJ, there's not really anybody uncommitted out there that's really that like bona fide high major guy. I'd say probably like the top uncommitted guy left is Isaiah Pasha, who's kind of on that borderline from Cardinal O'Hara. Where he's had some high major guys come in and sort of, come in and flirt a little bit, but haven't gone all the way in yet.
While you mention him, what do you think of his game? Because he's obviously a guy, I shouldn't say obviously, for those who don't know, transferred into the Catholic League from the Harrisburg area last year, and from my eyes has really increased his. He was always versatile, but he's like a much smoother player than he is from a year ago. But I'm curious what your thoughts on his game over last year.
I mean, he was a kid I'd identified pretty early, and I'll do my little victory lap on that from before he before he transferred into O'Hara, out at Central Dolphin East playing with Team Final Red. Had identified him on 15U and sort of tracked him through his last year in the Mid-Penn Conference. Knew he was a prospect and definitely knew he had talent and was a Division I, prospect for me. But did not expect him to have the splash that he had in the Catholic League from year one. And I don't think gets enough credit for really to people who don't know that he was coming off the bench for Central Dauphin East as a sophomore, and to me looked like their most talented player, but it, you know, wasn't a key role, wasn't sort of mentally certainly hadn't clicked that he was a huge star out there or anything like that. And from that to then the following year of first team All Catholic League, and you know, was I think the only guy that led his team in points, rebounds, assists, blocks. I mean, he was everything for that O'Hara team. I mean, that just shows such huge growth from a mental and physical standpoint in a really short period of time. And still a kid who's young for his grade. Still a kid personally, if you ask me, like projects to be able to have success at the high major level. Sort of gets hurt right by the immediacy of recruiting right now, and guys wanting older players and being able to hit the transfer portal, wanting guys who could contribute right away, rather than being able to kind of develop guys at that high major level, because he still just got some things he has to work out from not having played as much as some of these other guys and being younger and you know, just maturing as a kid. But the game is all there. I mean, like you said, smooth, touches the game in all kinds of ways, pretty competitive kid, can really pass the ball. It's my favorite part of his game.
Are there any other 2023s uncommitted that you think are a little under the radar? Maybe not even necessarily D1, because I've talked to D2, D3 coaches too, or any other local seniors that you think maybe should be getting a little more than they're getting?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, just for where my knowledge base is at right now, I'll stick more on the D1 side, but I'm certainly happy to talk about any other small college guys you might be able to throw out. But one I would definitely say is Daseer Haskins at Camden. Kind of gets lost in the mix of some of his, 5-star teammates, both in AAU and at high school. But when you strip that away, especially like you go see him in a Camden Open gym, when those guys get, broken up and get to match up with each other, you got a 6'7", 6'8" kid who can make shots from the perimeter, can really handle and pass the ball for that size, and is pretty rangy defensively and plays hard and is active. And he's a lefty. Coaches, always like the sort of unorthodoxness of being a lefty. It doesn't really make sense to me where his recruitment hasn't totally climbed out of that low major range as far as guys who are really in there consistently and recruiting him hard. The other one who's just kind of been mowing down every point guard who's been put in his path this fall, not just this fall, but really take it to another level this fall, has been Bud Clark, Adam Bud Clark at West Catholic, who's had a chance to match up with a few kind of marquee names in the 2023 regional guard crop in the last few weeks and months at some of these off-season events, and you could tell sort of taking it with a chip on his shoulder that he didn't at that time have a committable Division I offer going up against some of these top 100 kids and on those days outplaying them. So he's definitely one. Also in the Catholic League, Dean Coleman Newsom's really been playing at a high level. Looking back to what he was really pre-knee injury that cost him his whole sophomore year and had him playing, I think, pretty not in his best shape and certainly still just getting his legs back under him as a junior, looking more like the player that we saw early on. And then actually a kid who I haven't had a chance to see yet, who I have to give the shout out to Tom Keller on, who I'm very eager to see, is this kid at Trinity, who seems like a big time sleeper in Harrisburg, 6'9" kid, Mikhailo Benastin, I think I'm saying that right, who is Ukrainian and coming in, was in school in Canada last year. So he's from Ukraine via Canada, and he's a 2023. So he'll be at Trinity for a year and is 6'9" and supposedly pretty skilled and mobile. And I'm really eager to see him. And he's one that coaches have sort of asked about and they haven't played in any of these fall things or anything. So I think a lot of people are sort of eager to go see him coming up once games get started.
Go ahead, Josh.
No, go for it, Owen.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, going down to the class of 24, obviously that seems to be a pretty good group. A couple guys blowing up. What have you liked about that, and how have you seen kind of some of those guys talking? Like, I guess Thomas, you can go ahead if you have a kind of list.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely been a fun group to track. It's another class that, as it looks right now, nationally is not the strongest, and again, there's time for that to change, but as it looks right now, not the strongest. But the flip side is that locally it's a pretty awesome class at the top, and when you talk about a national class, you're talking about that top end talent in a given region. So I think I said this to you, Owen, yesterday, that really when you look at the 5 guys who to me have really separated themselves locally, of in no particular order really. Jalil Bethia, Matt Gilhool, Jalil from Archbishop Wood, Matt Gilhool from Westtown, Ahmad Noel from Imhotep, Thomas Sorber from Archbishop Ryan, and Robert Wright from Newman Goretti. I would put that 5 over, with up there with just about any regions in that class of as far as like real bona fide high major guys who are approaching the point where they can play just about anywhere in college. And I think really be able to make impacts, if not right away, then certainly down the line at some really, really high levels of college basketball. So it's been a fun group to track. There's definitely a pretty deep crop of low and mid-major talent below that. But those 5, as far as like the high levels, have really clearly separated themselves and are all guys that like they make it really easy to talk to coaches about and vouch for, because they perform pretty consistently and are all, solid kids and come from solid programs and solid coaches. And like I said, the consistency that they've been performing at has really been fun to watch.
What's it like when you kind of see some of these kids you followed? I know a lot of those guys had big summers recruiting wise.
Mm-hmm.
Matt and Jaleel probably in particular. What's that like when you've been tracking these guys for a while and kind of see maybe some of the things that you saw early on and other kind of people nationally are starting to notice?
Yeah, it's always fun. Certainly. I mean, there's always like the interesting part of it where like a kid can get quote unquote like discovered by somebody like a year and a half after I've been writing about them as a high major kid. But that's sort of what comes with, a lot of my work is more behind the scenes, and I don't need to be the first one out there publicly sort of stamping every kid. That's not what the job is for me. But no, it's fun. And especially like, like I said, you do get to know these kids and their families, certainly from a personal standpoint, some more than others. But the ones who you do, it's obviously you take any personal stuff out of the evaluation, but still just on a human level, it's cool to see people who you've known have their lives change basically. Some families who didn't always expect this, and in the course of 6 months, it's, oh wow, now like the kid's college is going to be paid for, and is going to have his pick of the litter of some of the programs we grew up watching on TV or whatever. So no, it's definitely fun. I still always want to, not to be the wet blanket, but like the offers are great. But to me, at least for when I take my real victory lap, is when the kid gets there and produces, and gets there and it's effective. That's when I was right about the kid being a high major player, not when he starts to get recruited at high major. Guys get recruited at levels they don't belong at all the time. Like I said, these 5 I do, I think are all really, really rightfully, getting recruited at that level. But that's still just kind of important for me to always realize, and obviously important for the kids and the families themselves to realize, is like, this isn't, you haven't made it, you haven't arrived. Like, this is still just sort of like the beginning of what has a chance for all these guys to be a really, really long process and journey and career in the game.
Ari, you mentioned those 5 2024s that you felt were the cream of the crop, and I don't think we need to spend too much time on them because they're 5 kids that we've written about sort of endlessly on the site. What about any under the radar 2024s, or maybe kids? You mentioned there's a whole lot of low to mid kids that you thought had a good summer and put themselves more in that conversation than they were in April.
Yep. I guess, I mean, I'll start sort of still near the top, and I say the one who really has the best argument to crash that group of 5 and include himself in it is a kid who the area probably doesn't know a ton about still, is Christian Bliss at the George School, who, if you listen to Josh's podcast,
as we all nod,
if you listen to Josh's podcast with Ben Luber, you'd certainly have heard some about his high school coach. But Christian was new to the area last year, coming down to the George School from New York. Came down with a little bit of a reputation from Archbishop Malloy and the Catholic League up there, and playing for the New York Wrens. And really is a guy that I'm surprised like the area hasn't embraced a little bit more yet. And some of it's just because the George School still isn't that visible, and it's in the suburbs, what have you. I know Ben's continuing to get them out there in a bunch of these games, but he's just got a game that's like really that the city would appreciate. I mean, he's vocal. He's got a swag to him. He's really confident. He wants to tell you about the buckets that he's giving you to you, but at the same time, like he'll play a team game and he wants to win. And when you put that with like a 6'3", 6'4" guard and with the skill level he has, like he's very, very close, if not right there, as a bona fide high major guard, and I would be remiss if I just mentioned those 5 and didn't say that he's really knocking on the door. And if you wanted to include him in that, I could see it.
He's a good kid too.
Yeah, no, and like I said, just a game that like he plays a fun game, and people in the area should definitely get out to see him while they have the chance. Ryan Williams, Matt's AAU teammate at Malvern Prep, had a really strong summer as well. Sort of transitioning from being primarily just a shooter scorer to starting to play a little bit more on the ball, and still somebody who he's got the baby face still, but he's starting to add a little bit of strength and just play a little bit more solidly, and that's really opened up his game. Definitely, another kid who I think is firmly mid-major with a chance to kind of continue to make some jumps into some high major territory. Darren Williams, Archbishop Ryan, I thought had a really strong summer and is going to really open a lot of eyes coming up this season for Archbishop Ryan. Like I said, Thomas Sorber's point guard, combo guard, projects as a point guard, plays more at the 2 for Ryan. Justin Hauser, Phelps School, has really, really come along quickly in the last 4 to 6 months. 6'11" kid who gave up pitching and really started focusing on basketball full time. And you've really, really quickly started to see the dividends. So that's always something that's really exciting. He's a kid that I could see in this time next year. We're talking about in high major conversations, certainly. A couple other guys. Now, this isn't again in order. It's not the next best, but just other guys with strong summers. Nick Koval from Parkland. I know a lot of game. Yeah, a lot of coaches have been really, really excited about it at a lot of different. I mean, he's one that has low, mid, and high majors, all intrigued and all sort of trying to figure out if they, obviously the higher levels trying to figure out if he's good enough, and the lower levels really just holding on for dear life, hoping that he doesn't kind of continue to get better and the guys don't continue to see him being a little off the normal beaten path.
Puts up a 30-piece every time someone from CWL is watching him.
Yep. No, and I mean, I mean, he's going to score. And I think that if there was an award for the most percentage of your team's points, somebody's going to score. It's Nick Koval. I mean, you'll see Parkland will tweet out their scores, and it's like, we won 47 to 44, and junior Nick Koval led with 36. It's a lot of that for Nick. But then, I mean, what's been good for coaches is getting to see that and then get to see him with team final. In the summer where he's in a much different role. It comes off the bench mostly, is mostly a shooter, but it's that appeal of being able to kind of do both that I think has people really intrigued. It's really a strong crop of guards. If I can just kind of rattle off a list of and there's probably close to a dozen low and mid major guards locally, and again, not really in any particular order. Kafik Myers, we haven't had a chance to mention yet, from Newman Goretti's pure Philly point guarders are going to find. Basile Laster, who was at Wood, who's now going to be at A&C for a repeat junior year, who's got a huge upside. It's a sort of 6'4", 6'5" ball handler. Josh Reed still at Archbishop Wood, who I think is going to really break out and open eyes this year.
He's got an Albany offer, I think.
Yeah, which I believe was his first offer.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily think will be his last. Flash Burton, Asim Flash Burton, who will be at O'Hara this year, was at MCS last year, is really coming into his own, and I think he's going to look like a different player than he looked like last year. And then even a kid like Laquan Bird, a judge, who I saw score 37 points in a Catholic League game as a sophomore last year. Not a that many. He's not a household name really in the Catholic League right now, but there's just a really, really strong crop of 2024 guards locally, and I definitely just left some out, but we don't have all night to go through it, but no, I mean, it's been a fun class, to track so far, and definitely some new names kind of continuing to emerge, which is always the fun part of this.
I guess this one doesn't have to be quite as in depth as that class. Just any underclassmen that you think people might want to follow locally with this high school season coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, underclassmen right now, I sort of always, especially for the audience of this podcast, always like to start with the two I grouped together as sort of the sons of the Big Five, being Jaron McCue at St. Joe's Prep and Sharif Jackson at Roman Catholic. Not just the sons of two Temple legends, but two of the very, very best underclassmen, and certainly maybe the two most productive freshmen in the area last year. Jaron is the son of Aaron McCue, obviously the head coach of Temple, former Sixer, longtime NBA pro. He's just a ridiculously efficient, say 6'2" right now, scorer, and sort of will probably transition into more of like a combo guard depending on how he grows. But really, really fun to watch. Just makes it look really easy putting the ball in the basket, despite looking like, from a physical standpoint, he doesn't belong on the floor yet at the high school level. Just still really skinny, but just makes it look really easy. With that said, and then Sharif is the son of Mark Jackson, who also played at Temple and played for the Sixers, and now doing TV with the Sixers, and really just like a throwback, traditional sort of back to the basket big, who's in the process of expanding out, but is a fun watch, especially for people who, from what I've been told, who watched his dad. He's very, very similar. And the technical post skill with which he plays is something you don't necessarily get to see that much anymore, and is really fun to watch. So I start there. There's a group that not a lot of people know about yet locally at the Phelps School that's really, really fun to watch, of young kids. Maybe the number one sophomore in the area, we'll see as we get to see him a little bit more, is this kid Will Riley, who's like a 6'7" ball guard. Not a pure point, can score, but plays the ball in his hands, and just came down from Canada, from Toronto, and I think just scored 45 points over the weekend in their first outing as a team, and is going to be a really fun guy to track. And they've got 3 other 2025s who all have a chance to be mid and high major kids. There's a big group at West Town as well, led by Cam Wallace, who came from Great Valley, who scored like 22 a game as a freshman there. And then also Jaden Kelsey, who's a local kid, been out in Colorado and just moved back to the area. Has a chance to be a really high level player, and kid who's a 2026 right now, but it sounds like it's probably going to class back up and might be the best of all of them, is a kid, Jaden Forsyth from New York, who's also at West Town. So it's kind of a good place to start with the underclassmen. It's still a class that's really taking shape. There's not guys right now that are like the very, very top of the pecking order nationally, but at the same time, this time a year ago, we wouldn't have necessarily said that about Jalil Bethia.
KJ Cochran?
KJ is probably the other one that I think is a chance to be at the top of that group we didn't discuss. Or near.
You talked about the most productive freshman. Him and Josiah Hudson were the other two that I could think of.
Absolutely. No, and KJ, I mean, he's been one that's sort of been in hiding a little bit right now during football season, from the basketball world. But no, I mean, probably 6'2", 6'3", good-bodied guard with a just really, really good feel for the game. And he's one of those kids who, when you talk about, you can identify pretty early sometimes, like you have one conversation with KJ, that kid, like he knows the game and he loves the game. And when you can identify that early and you mix in his some of his physical and skill traits, I mean, he's got a chance to be really, really good. Just definitely really looking forward to just seeing it more.
Do you fall one way or the other on, since you talk about him being a football star? There are people that say multi-sport, play as many sports as you can. And some people will say, you need to specialize because, you mentioned like Justin Hauser, who drops baseball and then rapidly improves. Do you fall one way or the other typically?
Not necessarily, because I'd be lying if I really thought that like I knew enough to say. And like there's arguments and examples you can point to on both sides of it. I think like anecdotally, I do like to ask kids if they play other sports, if they have played other sports. And frankly, just most of them have. So I think like just that experience, at least not necessarily at the high school level, but growing up of just having played some different sports and really just being on teams and team dynamics, especially with in today's day and age with how some of this stuff gets, just understanding being part of a team at a young age, I think is really, really important. And the reality is it gets harder and harder now with how competitive the recruiting space is and how valuable exposure is. I do feel bad for the kids who really love multiple sports or are really good at multiple sports and feel pressured to give one up or give another up. But I would be lying if I said sometimes it can't be the difference of like, if you're right on that bubble of D2 and D1 and you'd spend 2 years focusing just on basketball rather than splitting your time, or you spent time going to this camp to get seen rather than on the football field, like there's advantages in that. I'd have to think. So like I said, some of them are just practical. Where are you spending your time? Are you going and getting seen as a basketball player if you want to get recruited, or are you at a track meet? And I don't begrudge the kid that's at the track meet. I just while he's at the track meet, I can't be watching him play basketball.
Mhm.
So if anything, you can kind of wind up out of sight, out of mind, which is unfortunate, and we try to combat against, but it's kind of natural.
All right, I don't want to keep you on here too much longer, but I did have one other question for you about sort of the nature of the scouting business, and especially as it pertains to 2022. The COVID pandemic obviously gave a lot of kids that fifth year in college and sort of changed the entire way the recruiting cycle works, right?
Yeah.
Fewer scholarships available and all of that. Has that changed at all the grade that you give a kid, knowing like, okay, maybe beforehand they would have been able to play at this level, but they're not going to anymore because of that? And in addition to that, when that fifth year thing ends, do you think we're going to go back to more of how it was pre-pandemic, or do you think we're still going to see similar levels of churn?
I think the levels of churn, the toothpaste is out of the tube on, and it's the fifth year thing I thought was a really terrible thing when they did it, and it's played out in practice exactly how I expected, and it's screwed a lot of kids who at the time weren't NCAA athletes but are now NCAA athletes or are in the process of becoming NCAA athletes. By just removing up scholarship opportunities, certainly. But it was in the midst of a lot of other changes that aren't going away, or certainly right now we don't know are going away with the transfer portal and NIL, and when I say the transfer portal, mainly the fact that kids don't have to sit out anymore their first time transferring from school to school, and increasingly don't necessarily even have to their second time transferring with the waiver process. And then obviously kids being able to profit off their name and likeness has, there was always, college basketball was always a business, but it's put the business side of it more on the upfront, where if you're not producing, if you're not producing, you're fired almost. And if you're an employee, if you're getting paid, if you're getting to do this, you have to produce, or you can get fired. And obviously in the college basketball space, that's the equivalent of, well, we're not going to bring your scholarship back, or, doesn't really look like there's minutes for you here next year. So I don't see that churn going away, unfortunately, anytime soon. And as far as, that's a great question, is how that changed like the grading process. And it's something that philosophically I've had to wrestle with, and I've talked with other scouts about, and certainly talked with Tom internally a lot about. I'd say for us, where it's changed probably the most is at the higher levels. And that's in line with sort of the changing shift of the recruiting landscape, where high major basketball is becoming almost its own sort of entity that's a little bit removed from the low and mid major ranks. And there were some numbers to it specifically last year where it was harder than ever to be on the floor as a true freshman, certainly at a high major level, and be anything close to like a reasonable player, because that level has gotten so much more talented and so much older. Guys are all concentrating there. So it's harder for me now to put a high major grade on a kid than it was 2 years ago, because it's just the reality is it's a lot harder to go in and produce and contribute immediately. And for everything we just talked about, if you're not contributing immediately, there's a lot more likely that you're not going to get the chance to see it through in a way that you might have 5 years ago, when there was less year-to-year turnover, and less pressure on coaches to win year to year, more incentive to develop players over time. Without that, it's a lot harder for me to give a kid a high major grade if I don't think, and this is again where the mental side comes in, where high major basketball's it's a job. And the commitment that you have to give mentally, physically, the kid's not ready for that. And I know feel like I know pretty well that he's not. It's a lot harder for me to put that grade on a kid, even if maybe his talent might back it up, or I think, hey, 3-4 years from now, if everything comes together, it could happen. That doesn't get a high major grade for me anymore, and it might have 2 or 3 years ago.
Well, Ari, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast here. Before we let you go, I just wanted to ask what you've got coming up in the calendar. I know we've got locally the Delco Hoop Showcase coming up this weekend at Pencrest. I don't know if that's something that would quite catch your attention. What events do you have coming up on the calendar? Where will you be?
Yeah, I'm still sort of figuring this weekend, the next few weekends out until the season. I know I'll be at Difference Makers preseason showcase next weekend at Life Center Academy, which should be a pretty good 7 or 8 game slate, mostly pretty local teams and some matchups you're not always going to see. I might be at Delco this weekend. This thing just got announced that Bronny James is coming east with Sierra Canyon for this event in Maryland over the weekend that I might end up at. I think it's Sierra Canyon, Oak Hill, and then Gonzaga and DeMatha from the WCAC down in DC. So they really just kind of finishing up with a few more of those events, and then really within the next like couple of weeks, the prep schools will start playing. I know like the first big event on my calendar will be the National Prep Showcase in New Haven, which is I guess the 18th through 20th. I think the whatever that weekend is before Thanksgiving. And then I'll really hit the ground running from there with the season. So looking forward to it. It's been a fun fall, but looking forward to the games that count. So.
Any local teams in the NPSI?
I don't. Perky Omen's going up this year.
Okay.
Yeah, which I know is something they've tried to do the past couple of years between COVID, and it's something where it's a little. There's only so many spots in the event. They're hard to come by. So no, I mean I think it's a definitely a big step for their program that Perky Omen's going to be going up. Unfortunately, not with the team that they might have had last year, the year before, that could really go up and make a lot of noise. But they're going to be going up and playing Brewster Academy, who's pretty much the best that New England has to offer. So it's going to definitely be fun to see. And I know Tom Balder, that's pretty happy to at least be in those conversations and be among those ranks, certainly.
Well, Ari, we again really appreciate you coming on. I'm sure we'll have you on throughout the season, talking high school hoops, recruiting, scouting, all that good stuff. Have a great night. Thanks to everybody for listening, supporting the City of Basketball Love podcast, and have a good night, everybody.
Go Phils.
Yep. Thanks, Josh.